Hello, welcome. As you know, my name is Aaron Young, and I've got the absolute privilege of having Fred with me. And Fred, so that I don't mispronounce your name, which I'm probably likely to do, and misrepresent where you're from and what you do, how about you take 60 seconds to introduce who you are and where you work?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Aaron. So my name is Fred Vallaeys. I currently head up Optmyzr. It's a PPC management SaaS tool. Before that, I was at Google. I've been doing PPC in some form or another since 1998, so quite a long time. Joined Google in 2002, was their AdWords evangelist, got to travel the world, was involved in product, helped acquire a company called Urchin, which is now Google Analytics. So fun times, and then decided to start my own company about 11 years ago, and that is Optmyzr. And our goal and mission is to make the lives of digital marketers better through technology. So that's me in a nutshell.
So we could pretty much say that you're one of the Google Search OGs or Google Ads OGs.
I am. It was fewer than 500 people when I joined in Mountain View. So I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 30 years. I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And I also speak Dutch because I'm originally from Belgium. And so that was the skill that got me hired at Google in the early days.
Correct. Well, as I said, it's an absolute pleasure having you on. And the reason for why I wanted to bring you on is, I think everyone would be aware there's a lot of changes happening in the space. So we just wanted to have a really open discussion on about how we can best prepare. But let's start with PPC automation. And what do you think the greatest impacts of PPC automation will bring to the everyday management of Google Ads campaigns for Google Ads specialists and agencies?
Well, I mean, most fundamentally, I would say it returns the marketer's role to that of a marketer as opposed to a data junkie who's in spreadsheets all day long and does a lot of repetitive tasks. That's really the core premise of automation. And then I think if you take it to that level of statistical automation, machine learning, generative AI, then it starts changing the game significantly. And then it's more of a question of like, what do we actually do? And the machines are quite good at picking keywords, writing ad text. But sort of at that base level, it's really just about freeing up your time. So one little concept that I wrote about in my book, in my second book, was automation layering. And the premise is that companies like Google, they're really, really good at automation. But when they think about automation, it's these really sophisticated, opaque, black box models that really frustrate a lot of advertisers and digital marketers. And so when I talk about automation, it's often about the automation that you put in place to control the machine from Google and make sure that it is doing sort of the right thing by your strategies. And if it's starting to deviate, you've got guardrails in place. And those guardrails will quickly tell you, hey, something wonky is going on. You might want to go check on that. And in some cases, even that responding to what's going wrong could be automated. So there's kind of different levels of automation.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. The way that I've really framed with all the changes to me happening in Google Ads, it used to be like a really direct tool where you could basically point Google where to go and it would pretty much go there, and it wouldn't veer out. Whereas now it's wanting to veer out. So I really like that analogy, what you're saying, putting the guardrails up. And I kind of deem it's more like they're not a compliant child anymore. They're a teenager that want to just do. If you tell them not to do something, they go, "I'm going to go do it anyway." So you've got to put those hard blocks in place to stop them doing things that are not going to be successful.
Yeah, exactly. That makes a lot of sense. So you must have kids then, right?
Well, I've got 3. How about you?
I've got 3 as well. They're not quite teenagers yet, but great analogy.
Yeah, well, I've got to the teenage years, and I always think about that. There's that little sweet spot, and it happens differently for each kid. Like for some of my kids, it was like that, one that came in at 2, another one came in at 4, and there's like that 12-month period where they're just compliant. They listen to everything you say. Yeah, it doesn't last long, but that's how it's going from here. All right, so that's in terms of a digital marketer. How do we roll that out in terms of what impact will AI have on digital marketing agencies and how they operate and how they function, especially those that are more bent towards PPC in terms of Google Ads? Hello there, Aaron Young here. I really hope you're enjoying this latest interview that is part of our Google Ads interview series. And all of these interviews are brought to you by Define Digital Academy, where we have a passion to empower you to be able to optimize your Google Ads campaigns so that you can see the best results for
your business or your client's business. And with that, we've actually released a brand new Google Ads optimization checklist. Now, if you've got my other checklists, I do need to stress that this is a brand new checklist, and it's the first time I've released a checklist with all of the 6 major campaigns that you need to be using in Google Ads. So that's everything from your search campaigns, your shopping campaigns, performance max, display, video, and demand gen. And what it does do is it not only lists all of the different optimization actions you need to complete, it also lets you know the correct time that you need to complete these optimizations. A very real trend that is happening in Google Ads right now is that the most successful Google Ads campaigns are the ones where you're not only going through and doing the right optimizations, but you're doing them at the right time. So enjoy the rest of this interview, but make sure before you go to follow the link in the description below so that you can get access to my updated Google Ads optimization checklist. Hope you enjoy the checklist and also the rest of this interview. See ya.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I think the place to start with that is really Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, and the quote that I'm sure everybody's listening today has heard, but I want to restate it because it's a really important thing. He said was 95% of marketers will lose their jobs to generative AI within 5 years.
Yeah.
And so what is the impact? Well, that's a pretty big statement right there, right? He says most of you listening today will lose your jobs as digital marketers. But really my take on the whole thing is a little bit different. If you look historically at the days of early machine learning and Deep Blue, Gary Kasparov playing against the computer, well, sure, the computer beat him, but the computer was like very purpose-built to play against Gary Kasparov. You couldn't have put it against another grandmaster and achieve the same result. And what Gary very quickly started to figure out was, even if you have a pretty decent chess player with a pretty mediocre computer and you put those two together, they can beat any supercomputer in the world, or they can also beat any human in the world. And so it's the whole premise of machine plus humans are better together. And so that's where I think we just have to shift our minds and start saying, well, this generative AI, and we're not competing against it, but it's a colleague. It's a colleague that we didn't have to pay like a full-time salary to. And it's not just one colleague who's now in charge of writing ads, but you can basically build an army of colleagues. You can build a whole company using custom GPTs, and you can have a couple of these GPTs that are highly skeptical about everything you do. And then you can have some GPTs that are highly supportive, and then some GPTs that put on the hat of having worked in the industry of your client, and a different one that works in a different industry. And all of a sudden, you got all these little pieces that help you be a better performer, because it's like you've surrounded yourself by a team of like really good experts.
Yeah. And obviously something I get, friends and family of mine that are interested in ChatGPT, and obviously my role, that's the thing they've been asking, are you worried? And for me, I think the role's going to be different. I'm not feeling threatened by it because it's always like it opens up more opportunities. So the way that I think about it is the role will be different, but it's also going to open up new jobs that we never even thought about and new roles that we never even thought about. And if you look in history, whenever that's happened, Industrial Revolution, when the internet came in, it's opened up new roles. And so that's I think we just got to embrace the change is the main thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how many people were podcast hosts 20 years ago? That's a completely new role that came in. And there was an interesting study came out of MIT, but basically 6 out of 10 job roles that existed in the 1940s do not exist today. Everybody seems to have a job and have something to earn a living, right? So it's a shift as opposed to the end of your job.
Yeah, well, when I was going through university in the late 90s, I mean, Google Ads wasn't even a thing. So, there's no way that I would have been able to predict that this is what I'd be doing for my career. So I just want to finish the conversation now before we move into some other parts of some really important topics. But I saw a quote from a wise man who was you. You said... You're not competing against ChatGPT, but you're competing against people who know how to use ChatGPT better than you do. Right now, so not more talking 2-3 years from now, right now, what are the best ways that you can use ChatGPT with Google Ads?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's really, again, about automation, right? And think about those tasks that you do repetitively, say more than 3 times in a month. And those could be little tasks. Or think about that one task that you do on a monthly basis that takes a huge amount of time. So that big task once a month, that's probably reporting. So having a GPT that explains what is happening in an account, that is tremendously useful. And it can do quite a good job at that. You give it to performance from the current month and the previous month, or that same month in the previous year, and it's going to start drawing like conclusions and explain, okay, well, it looks like your conversions are up and it's due to these campaigns that have shifted, and it can really give this explanation. So that's a huge help. And then in terms of those smaller tasks, that would be finding negative keyword ideas from your search terms reports. I mean, we all struggle when we pull down a search term report and it's 10,000 queries are in there. I mean, how do you go through that? And so we basically sort it from highest volume to lowest volume. But what if you wanted to have a semantic ranking of like which of these words are the furthest removed? Which ones of these are like the most rebellious teenagers that have gone like really far from what your intent was? But that's semantic, right? And so the numbers themselves don't tell you that. But that's where GPT and large language models are so good, because that's what they do. They do language. And so now you can say, take this list of 10,000 terms and bring back the 100 worst ones on sort of a relevance basis, and then it presents you with that, and you can make a decision on it. So these are just two of the ways. I also really like to use it for scripting, for learning statistical analyses, for figuring out how to do like media mixed models, all of this more sophisticated stuff that before was really, really difficult for me to even grasp.
Yeah, I find, especially if you're an individual team, one of the best ways as well is, as you mentioned, like this task of just coming up with ad copy, like I think you mentioned before, rather than just you trying to create it, like some different themes that come up. Yeah, it's a great tool for that as well.
Well, and then like, let's dive deeper on that, right? So I love the ad copy. I don't love talking about it because it's one of the most simple ones that I think everyone can just fundamentally grasp. But what's really cool about it is that like we can all come up with ad copy, but at some level, it's like I've got 10 headlines and getting those next 5, well, that's just tedious. Okay, fine. But what's more interesting is like I've got hotel bookings. Put myself in the shoes of a budget traveler. I'm in my 40s. I make decent money, so I'm not a budget traveler. So it's hard for me to put myself in the shoes of those users. And GPT, you can tell it, behave like someone like that, and tell me what they might be searching for. Tell me what they find interesting. And so that it leads into what are the right keywords, but also what's the messaging in the ads. What should you be putting on the landing page? And sometimes it's eye-opening because, again, if you're not in that position, it's sometimes hard to empathize and put yourselves in those different shoes.
Yeah, no, that's great. Let's move on into SearchGPT. And obviously, this is going to be coming in. I know it's in the beta testing now, beta release. But what impact will SearchGPT have on Google search?
Well, so honestly, this is the first time since Google was invented, so in more than 20 years, that I legitimately think Google needs to be worried about its future. And it's simply because like when there were other search engines, they were all doing the same thing, but it's a different algorithm, right? So maybe the ranking is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But Google's always been quite good at relevance. So that's never been the problem. But what GPT is doing is like, it's such a fundamental shift in how you behave when you do a search. And that's a big deal. And especially if you start looking at SearchGPT or ChatGPT in voice assistant mode. So we're no longer talking about typing. We're talking about like the app that you install on your phone or on your computer. And you just have a conversation with it. Like I'll go for a walk around my office building and I have a conversation. I'm like, hey, can you give me some ideas for, a blog post that I should write? And by the way, Google yesterday announced that you can now have negative keywords for PMAX. So like any ideas around that? And you're literally having a conversation like you're on the phone with someone.
Yeah.
And that's just so mind-blowing, right? But now extend that to the search landscape. Like if I am considering buying an iPad, like why do I need to look through all of these blue links to figure out like what's the right iPad for me and like what features should I care about? Like first of all, the assistant to generative AI, because I've interacted with it so much, it knows I have children. So if I say, what iPad should I buy? It'd be like, well, is this for you or is this for your 10-year-old? Like, because I'm going to give you different answers. That's already fundamentally like leaps and bounds ahead of what Google does. And now the fact that it just summarizes all the best information and it helps me come to a conclusion of what I should buy without having to do 30 searches myself and click a whole bunch of links, that's massive, right? And so the search engine is going to come out. What I look to Google for these days is really, it's a transaction engine. So after GPT has told me the vacation I want to go on, the tour I want to take, the product I want to buy, the decoration I want to put in my home, after it's told me that, I'm like, I go to Google and I find the cheapest price and I buy it. Or I go to Amazon and I do the same thing.
Yeah.
But like in terms of actual helpfulness, that generative experience is so much better. And I think that is going to really shift how consumers behave and how advertisers need to connect with them.
Yeah. And I mean, where are your honest opinions with Google's product of Gemini? I mean, where is it in relation to SearchGPT? How far behind is it? And will that be able to make any headway into the market?
Yeah. So how far behind it is, that's kind of hard to quantify, right? But honestly, I'm not a fan. And I'm not a fan because I think Google is in a tough position where they're under so much scrutiny that they just want to play it very, very safe. And so, for example, if you go to Google's models and you ask to generate a picture that has humans in it, it's very conservative, or it wants to be like super woke and it's going to include people of all different ethnicities. Sometimes, like I explicitly said, that's not what I want, but it's going to ignore me because it says, well, for us to be like not seen as racist, we need to include people of all ethnicities.
Yeah.
Right. Or it just says like, listen, I'm not even going to generate humans because like, God knows that somebody might get mad at me. So for all those reasons, I think Google is just a bit behind and it's not as useful. And it's also from this premise, like everybody in the media goes out and says, oh my God, look, Google recommended that you should eat rocks. Put rocks or like put glue in your pasta. But it's like, yeah, that's kind of a funny story. But like at the end of the day, we're still humans. Like we looked at that, we're like, probably not the best idea, right? So trust a human at some level to work with the machine and weed out what doesn't make sense and kind of like iterate on what does make sense. And that's where I think Gemini is way behind. But I think technically Google invented GPT. They invented the transformer. So it's not like they don't have the right people working there. It's just, I think corporate culture needs to be adjusted to catch up to where GPT and OpenAI and Claude from Anthropic and those types of models are.
I mean, do you think there's any element of it, it's even trying to protect what they've got with Google Ads in terms of Google Ads-based search, in terms of just a pure money coming into their business?
Yes, but you could counter argue on that because so if you look at Bing being behind Google when it comes to search, I think they had a much more conservative approach of how they brought generative into the results. They put Copilot very much on the side, whereas Google, basically for many, many weeks, at least half of the search results page was generative and it was pushing all of the organic and the ads down to the bottom. And so I think that was a bold move and I think that was the right move because I think ultimately like that generative experience is going to be better. It is going to be preferred by people, but people just need to like shift their mind in terms of how useful it is. And again, did this also almost misinformation about the media saying like, listen, it doesn't work very well. Sure, but it's evolving so quickly that what was broken yesterday is probably fixed today. And then there's this whole notion about Amara's law, which says that in the near term, people overestimate the impact of technology and in the long term, they underestimate it, right? So I think we all have too high of a hope of what it can do today, but we're not seeing like these radical changes that are going to happen in say like a 10 to 15 year time frame due to how generative AI works today.
So now that that's coming, for many people who are listening to this, there'd be a large proportion who earn a significant amount of their income from Google Ads management. So how should they prepare for these changes? What are the best things that they should be putting in place today so that they're not one of the 95% that have no income 5 years from now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, listen, so the approach that I've taken, and maybe people can learn from that, is I've always tried to put myself on the cutting edge of something that people want to talk about or that I think people should talk about. So right after I had left Google and I've no longer had the Google brand next to my name to be invited to speak at conferences, to be allowed to write blog articles on search engine land, I discovered about these scripts, ad scripts. And I thought, my God, this is the most amazing thing since sliced bread. Like this is automation that literally anyone can do. You don't need to know how to set up servers and do all this really complicated infrastructure work. You can literally hire a JavaScript developer or grab a piece of code from Google, copy paste it in, make some like minor modifications that don't really require any high-level coding experience, and you can be off to the races. So I was like, okay, let me jump on that. And now it's again, I'm jumping on the generative AI bandwagon because I think it is something that's so fundamentally important. But that's what your clients want to talk about too, right? So try to understand, how does this really work? Even if it's a use case that isn't quite scalable today, like show them a use case that's going to blow their minds as far as like, oh my God, like if I can do that for my business in 2 years, like that is game changing. That puts me miles ahead of my competitors. So those are the conversations you got to try to get into. So in addition to working with the AI and doing the simple stuff like ad text generation and keyword generation, like push the boundaries. So one of the things I like to play with, I've got these Meta AI glasses.
Yeah.
And so basically I can look at something and I can say, hey, Meta, look at this newspaper article and see if you can get any ideas for keywords for my business. And so it's like basically picking up on trends, and it knows how to do keyword generation, but it's kind of connecting these weird dots together. And that's what humans are really good at too, right? It's that innovation. It's called recombinant innovation. It's like two things that existed before, but how we put it together in a creative way. That could be the thing that makes our clients love us so much and say, oh, well, Fred, he's the guy who really understands it. So he's got to be on our team. And I think that's the same thing for agencies.
While we're talking about this, I want to circle back to a comment I think you said right at the start, one of the first questions is just about in terms of Google Ads, it is probably more changing from a search base to that marketers have to lead into more of the marketing side of that. I know for me, that's where I'm thinking that's kind of a really good, knowing that's a big pathway. Inside of Google Ads, at the moment, the Google Ads community, there's this kind of real push between trying to hold back to just the search targeting and being negative towards newer type of campaigns in and around performance max and demand gen. Yeah, so I mean, do you have any thoughts about where current marketers focus on Google Ads should really balance that tension between the more traditional type of Google campaigns versus the newer, more automated based campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, so a couple of answers around that. So Optmyzr, my company's done a number of really good data studies very recently. So Nava Hopkins, our evangelist, she ran these data studies, and one of them was about performance max. And what we analyzed was if you sort of limit performance max by adding search themes or you're adding audiences, does that make results better or worse? And we were very much looking at something as close as possible to a business result, like a conversion rate, CPA, ROAS. We also looked at CTR, but those were sort of more intermediate. But what was interesting was the more that you put limitations on the AI and you restrict Bmax by giving it an audience, the results actually got worse. And so we have to shift our minds, and we have to, at some level, allow the AI to go and explore and do what it does, which goes beyond the comprehension of a human. So we can monitor which way it's going, and then we can reel it back in. But I think for us to proactively limit it from experimenting with things, that often in the data that we see actually leads to worse results than what you could have got. So that's one approach that I would take in terms of limiting it. But then I think the other thing is obviously like understand keyword targeting and understand how audiences layer on top of that. But let's also look at the long game. So when you work with an LLM or a generative assistant, we're not talking about individual keywords. We're not talking about that 10-word keyword that we've been used to on Google. We're talking about entire conversations, me rambling for a minute about what is that type of couch that I want and where did I last see it, and is it like fuzzy and what kind of like shade of blue is it? Like you just can't equate that to keywords anymore. So now that turns into a GPT conversation, but also think about these glasses that I have and these assistant pins that you can now get. They basically start forming your human memory and they put it in the cloud. So now imagine the time when I say to my assistant, my generative assistant, hey, can we go and buy that couch? And I haven't specified anything about that couch, but because it knows where I was, which products I looked at, and I probably interacted with it, I was like, hey, Meta, take a look at this couch and do you remember it? Or can you tell me what material it is or where I could buy it? All of that is in there, right? So now I just say couch, and it's like, this is the couch you probably wanted. So that's such fundamental shifting of how we think about targeting. And that's what we have to start preparing for.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you're saying there. And it is a tension at the moment. Like I will admit, I'm very much talking to a lot of, it's my role with coaching different business owners and different it's very much a tension. And we're just trying to move them along to, we're not throwing everything out today in terms of search. So definitely not saying don't do any search campaigns, don't do any shopping campaigns. But if you're not moving into these newer type of campaigns, performance max and demand gen, very, very soon you're just going to be left behind. Because the big thing with it too is make sure you've got enough data in your account. So you're uploading that data of your first party data so that those campaigns can perform properly.
Wise words. I like it.
Last thing I want to talk on, and I'm going to come back and reference another quote that you said, and this is in regards to landing pages. So I just want to have a bit of a discussion, and I'll read this full sentence out just so people know what we're talking about. But you said, recent research has challenged the long-standing belief. It turns out that effectiveness of using human faces on landing pages isn't as universal as once thought. Depending on the audience and the product, other elements like bold visuals, compelling graphics, or even abstract imagery might perform better. So can we just use that as a bit of a discussion on what you're seeing the future of landing pages are and what elements marketers should really be focusing on for their own businesses and clients?
Right. And so that statement that I made was in response to some research that I read in the Wall Street Journal. I can't remember the exact source of that research. I picked it up through the Wall Street Journal. But it was interesting because the point that the researchers had made was you get so many people doing selfies and everybody always wants to have themselves in the picture. And so if you have an influencer who goes to, say, Machu Picchu, and all these pictures of Machu Picchu now have like people's faces in them, then someone who would have considered traveling to Peru and going to see Machu Picchu could actually become somewhat turned off from wanting to go there, because it's like all of these other people have claimed the uniqueness and the coolness of that place. Whereas if I saw a photo that was just showing that landscape, that place, then people can imagine themselves in it. It's the same reason why when you stage a house for sale, well, you remove all the photos of the family, right? You just put in like nice fancy furniture, but you don't want to make it look like somebody else is using that house. You want people to imagine themselves in that house. And so this is a very specific category where this applies. But just for me, it opened my eyes because it was this old assumption that, you always need to have people on the page, but sometimes those people actually claim ownership of that thing that you're trying to sell. And then in the consumer's mind, they're like, well, then it's not for me. Then it's not unique enough. And this came to weddings, vacations, so a lot of destination related stuff. But even then, thinking maybe a little bit further, like who's the type of person who's using this? If you show me a product that I might have considered cool, but the images of a child using that product, say the iPad, maybe I'm like, well, then it's not for me because I'm not a child. So you've actually maybe risked turning off some people. So unless you can really bring it back to, okay, that person needs that image and that person needs that image, that might work. But this brings us into something really cool and kind of creepy that's going to happen. But thanks to generative AI, here's a story, right? But I've talked to VPs in the Silicon Valley. So we're not that far away from a world where Netflix, you go to a version of Netflix and the movies that you see and the programs that you see are made just for you. Wow. It knows that I want to see a movie about superheroes, with unicorns, with a happy ending, but not too happy. Boom, generates the story. It can do that today. Generating the video, that's getting close to, will be there at some point. Now, that's a 5-year vision, but in between now and that vision becoming true, it's not that hard to take a car commercial and like slightly modify the face of the person in the vehicle. By the way, you almost never see a person in the vehicle. But if you did, it would look kind of like me. Oh, interesting. I can picture myself in that SUV. And by the way, like it's an SUV, but I drive SUVs around the city. I'm not the outdoorsy type of guy who's going to, take it off trail. So it's the right SUV that I'm interested in with someone who looks like me driving through a city that also happens to look a little bit like California where I live. It is a video ad just for me. And so it's the same thing on landing pages, right? The more that you can subtly almost manipulate people into seeing themselves in that situation, that is the thing that might actually pay off.
No, I love the comment. And as you were starting to talk, I was going to say about, because one of my good friends is a real estate agent, he said that's the biggest fight that he always has against a lot of homeowners is let's take all the photos out of, grandma and you, because exactly right. You want people to imagine that they're the hero of the product as opposed to, the staged model or whatever they've got there.
There's another point, if I may, about landing pages. So I think one thing that this is Microsoft data. So what Microsoft found is that people spend more time on search when they interact with the Copilot. And the interesting thing about that is it doesn't mean it takes them longer to find what they need. That means that they very quickly find what they need, but they open up new layers of exploration about that thing. And so to me, what that's saying is the amount of time that, typically you think of search as very quickly making a connection of the person looked for this. Here's a link to the landing page, let them go there. And then the landing page's job is to sell them on all the unique value propositions and the benefits and all the great things about this product or this service. Well, that's going to shift. I think people are going to stay longer with the generative assistant and they're going to say, oh, great, that might be the product that I want. Can you tell me more about it? Is it good for a family with children? Is it good for someone who likes to travel internationally? And so all of these things that you might have had to take care of on the landing page now happen with the generative assistant, and your landing page to some degree becomes almost like Google, which is the transaction engine. It's just about where is that link to buy and put in my shipping address. And then further down the line, even that's going to go away. Like you've had that conversation with the generative assistant and you're going to say, I love it. Buy the thing, and it's got your credit card, it's got an API into the vendor, it's going to do all of the transacting for you, and the thing is going to show up to your house. So I think the importance of landing pages is going to become severely lowered, but at the same time, think about your landing pages as a way to help the generative assistant know the things that it should know.
I just want to focus in on that comment there where you said, so the importance of landing pages are going to be lowered. So are you more suggesting that in the future, it's more going to be in terms of the landing page, it's removing the markers that increase the conversion rates and more just making it much more easier for that transaction to occur? Is that the right shift that we're talking about there?
That's the shift that I think is going to happen. And I don't think it necessarily means you have to curtail what's on the landing page. I'm just saying that I think more and more people, as they come to your landing page, will already be so much better informed than they used to be. And it's already binary in their head. Like they already know they want to buy it from you. You don't have to do the convincing anymore because that's been done through the generative assistants.
So it would more be making sure that even, just practically right at the top of the page, there's an option for them to just go in and complete the purchase. So you getting out of the way if they don't need the information, so they can just go and buy the product, book the service, whatever they need to do. But then there is still extra information lowered in the page if they need that.
Exactly. I think that's the right approach.
Hey, Fred, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. I really, really appreciate it. For anyone watching the video on YouTube or listening to the audio version of this, if you go to the description of the show notes, I'm going to have links to Optmyzr and also Fred's profile, so you can follow all of his great stuff. Fred, once again, thank you. I always give people the option. Is there any last comments or last remarks you want to make before we finish up?
Yeah, if you love automation and want to play with some generative AI directly related to PPC products, that's what Optmyzr does. So we got that 2-week free trial. So check it out. We got lots of happy users. And in fact, one of them connected the two of us. So very happy to be on your show. And thanks for inviting me.
That's great. And we'll put a link down to where you can get that free trial as well. All right. Thanks, Fred.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, everyone.